Remember this Joe Biden video that recently went viral?
The younger generation now tells me how tough things are. Give me a break. No, I have no empathy for it. Give me a break. Because here's the deal, guys. We decided we were going to change the world, and we did. We did. We finished the civil rights movement to the first stage. The women's movement came into being. So my message is, get involved. There's no place to hide.
Look, the dismissive nature of Biden's statement upset a lot of young people in America for reasons that should be fairly obvious at this point. First off, part of changing the world for the better is to draw attention to the issues at play. But when millennials do so, they inevitably get mocked or belittled like Biden just demonstrated in that video. Secondly, if you're running for president, you're supposed to be looking to lead the country and improve people's lives. It's impossible to do that if the concerns of an entire generation are brushed off as nothing to be worried about. Of course, there are some who love Biden sprinkling that salt on the open wounds of America's youth, and New York Times opinion columnist Bret Stephens is one example. In an op-ed titled, "Dear Millennials, the feeling is mutual," Stephens argues, quote, "No faction on the Democratic side more richly deserves rebuking than the one Biden singled out. These younger generations that specialize in historic self-pity and moral self-righteousness, usually communicated via social media with maximum snark." Apparently, Stephens doesn't understand the meaning of irony because he literally dedicated an entire op-ed to being annoyingly misguided and snarky. He then goes on to avoid addressing any of the financial struggle felt by millennials and lumps all of them together as this monolithic group that just wants to censor conservatives like him on college campuses. Look, we'll get to that in just a second, but before we do, I'd like to talk about the economic woes of my generation since Stephens failed to do so. Just this morning, the Wall Street Journal, which is the furthest thing from a progressive or liberal publication, put out a story regarding the true nature of economic hardship for millennials, writing that Americans born between 1981 and 1996 have failed to match every other generation of young adults born since the Great Depression. They have less wealth, less property, lower marriage rates, and fewer children. Millennial households had an average net worth of about $92,000 in 2016. That's nearly 40% less than Gen X households in 2001, of course, adjusted for inflation, and about 20% less than baby boomer households in 1989. Part of the problem is that the economy crashed just as a giant group of millennials were graduating college and entering the job market. And Americans who entered the labor market when unemployment rates rose by 5 points, about the same as the 2007 to 2009 recession, saw their cumulative earnings fall by 10% over the first decade of a career. Millennials may never catch up with the generations of Americans that preceded them. Combine record student loan debt, record consumer debt, and the inability to afford property, and you have a gross cocktail of a generation left behind. These trends are not only devastating for millennials today, but also extremely problematic for the country's future. Social safety net programs like Social Security and Medicare aren't going to have the funding they need because millennials are discouraged from having kids. Who can blame them? Kids are expensive as hell. Our current system is set up to have the young and healthy subsidize the sick and elderly. If millennials aren't having enough kids to replace themselves, then the whole system is in jeopardy. But why address all these legitimate issues when you can just antagonize young people instead? Stephens does exactly that, writing, quote, "All of these struggle sessions play to the sound of chortling 20-somethings who have figured out that in today's culture, the quickest way to acquire and exercise power is to take offense. This is easy to do because the list of sins to which one may take offense grows with each passing year, from the culturally appropriated sombrero to the traditionally gendered pronoun." Why is Stephens avoiding a deep dive into the uncomfortable economic reality for millennials while simultaneously smearing an entire generation as children concerned about silly things like sombreros? Oh, that's right. Maybe it was the pathetic lack of critical thinking by people like Stevens who created this whole mess in the first place. Why take ownership or responsibility for stupid decisions like pushing for a costly preemptive war with Iraq, which is what Stevens did, when you can just sit on your high horse and act like you're somehow above the garbage that destroyed the future of this country? Stevens argues that Biden could make a virtue of the defect by emphasizing his distance from everything that defines the worst aspects of millennial culture, the coddled minds and censorious manner and inability to understand the way the world works. Wait a minute. Did the guy who supported the war in Iraq just try to argue that young people are the dumb ones? I guess none of this should be surprising coming from a man who attended the London School of Economics, which was the very hub that shaped the modern perception of free market economics. Crony capitalism isn't the bug, but rather the feature for people like Stevens. But please, don't be fooled in the efforts to divide Americans based on age or gender or race. This is about the haves and have-nots. The same financial stress young people are feeling is very true of every generation at this point. Sure, the instability is more pronounced for millennials, but the fact is that the widening wealth gap demonstrates that there are two diverging financial realities.
Meredith Riley, a 37-year-old social worker in New Jersey, used to think of herself as middle class.
It was the good life. It really was. It was wonderful. And now, if I don't go to work, I don't get paid.
Her county job, which paid about $50,000 a year, was eliminated in the recession. A single mother of two, Riley now works 3 part-time jobs and makes less money.
I think the toughest part is not preparing a future for my children that my parents prepared for me.
Barely half of adults are now middle-income earners, defined as a household making between $42,000 and $126,000 annually. The percentage has been falling steadily since 1971. Richard Fry, who co-authored a new Pew Research study, says that as the middle class has hollowed out, the upper income bracket's grown from 14% to 21% of Americans. That upper class now takes home nearly half of all annual income in the U.S., 49%, up from 29% in 1970.
Hey, but no crying, okay? Biden has no empathy for you, and Bret Stephens is gonna go ahead and mock and judge you. So when Stephens is dismissing the concerns of millennials, just know that he's dismissing the economic struggle of all of us. Pew Research found that the middle class was hit the hardest from the recession, with median wealth dropping by a stunning 21% between 2001 and 2013. But again, don't cry to Biden about it because he's got no empathy for you. And if the lack of empathy is upsetting, good, you should be angry. But you can always count on goons like Bret Stephens to mock you because it seems the system has worked out real well for him. Did you know that TYT Network is now available on YouTube's new streaming platform, YouTube TV? Get access to full TYT episodes and exclusive shows by signing up for YouTube TV today. All new subscribers get a 7-day free trial, so head over to youtube.tv and search for the TYT Network channel.